Hello everyone. My name is Martins from HackMotion. Welcome to our webinar series for 2023. I'm thrilled to announce our next conversation for the webinar, which is something that's has been something that I've been dealing with my golf swing, with myself, and is something I've been thinking about a lot, which is the grip in the golf swing. And to talk about the grip in the golf swing, we have a special guest joining us today. He's director of instruction at Manhattan Woods Golf Academy. He's Golf Digest Best In-State New York Coach in 2021, 2022. He's featured on Golf Magazine Watch List for Best and Up-and-Coming Coaches. He's the coach of multiple PGA, LPGA, and European Tour players. It's Jason Birnbaum. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Martins. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Awesome to have you and get the conversation going. Before we start, I'll explain or set up a little bit kind of how the structure is going to be for the conversation. It's going to be a conversation like where we just simply ask questions around the grip. We start off with a little bit of like a macro view, and then we focus in on specific things around the grip and how they work in conjunction with the wrists. What's important, this is a pre-recorded conversation, but we still encourage people to ask questions, because when we air it, Jason is going to be joining us for a live Q&A after the presentation. So still, please, in the Q&A box, just drop your questions and we will make sure we get them covered after the presentation. But other than that, why don't we get started? And Jason, I will ask a kind of a very general first question that could kind of help us set up the conversation going forward. Could you generally kind of explain what is the grip in the golf swing? What's the role of it? And what are maybe some kind of general theoretical definitions that we need to know about the grip as we're kind of progressing through the conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, listen, it's really our only connection to the golf club, right, is our grip and how we hold the club. So we've heard a lot of great past players and champions and great coaches talk about the importance of the grip over the years. And it's one of these things that really hasn't changed, right? As the game has evolved and we've had access to launch monitors and things like HackMotion, you know, some theories have certainly changed about how we look at the swing or ball flight. But the grip has stood the test of time, really. I mean, you pick up a golf instruction book from any point in the history of golf, and you're going to see some things that still hold true today, a lot of things that still hold true today, and that's just how we hold the club. So, you know, it's one of these things. I'm not sure there's a perfect grip. Everyone has their own grip. We see all kinds of grips on tour, PGA Tour, LPGA Tour. We see strong grips. We see excessively strong grips. We see neutral grips. We see weak grips. I mean, like anything else, at the end of the day, it's, you know, can we deliver the club an impact consistently and you know, get the ball to do what we're trying to get it to do, and do we have a grip that's helping us to do that or hurting us to do that is really the question that the coach is presented with. But yeah, I mean, the grip is, like I said, only connected to the club, so it's got to be something that works for you, or it's going to be compensation from the start.
My follow-up question to that would be, what type of grip you would recommend for a beginner player? Because obviously you mentioned the process of developing and having it personalized, and person that's kind of spent much more years in the game has a better understanding of his personal grip and the nuances around it. But how should a beginner think about it as he's developing his grip, as he's starting his golf journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say my personal preference is to be somewhat neutral. I wouldn't want to be too much on one side of the spectrum, but I certainly would advocate favoring a little bit of a stronger grip, a little bit on the strong side. I would err on that side. So I'm right-handed. So for a right-handed golfer, it would be having both hands turned to the right a little bit so that you can see two knuckles on your left hand and a little bit of the logo on your glove if you were wearing one. I find a little bit of a stronger grip helps to engage the wrists a little bit, which is something that beginners struggle with. Having a stronger club face will just help to maximize distance and get the hit a little bit more solid, which is important to get with a beginner. So my personal preference would be on the neutral side, not too drastic either way, but definitely favoring being a little bit stronger, being a little bit more in the fingers of the lead hand, just to encourage a little bit more wrist action, a little bit more release of the club. I would highly recommend that for a beginner.
Yeah. And one thing I would love to clarify with respect to that, given that it is personal, right? There isn't such a term as a good or a bad grip, I would assume, right? Where the people shouldn't, especially as they start, they shouldn't be thinking about, hey, I'm having a bad grip or I'm having a good grip. It all is very personalized, I would assume, right? As your coaching experience.
I would agree with that. I mean, grip is definitely one of these things that's a very individualistic part of the game. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. But with that said, you don't want to be too much of all the way to one side with the grip. So an excessively weak grip where the lead hand is turned towards the target too much and very much in the palm will be very detrimental to the swing, especially a newer golfer. And contrary to that, a grip that's extremely strong and very much in the fingers, and the lead hand is turned way to the right, that would also make things a little bit difficult. So as long as we're not like way outside of the parameter of what excessive would be, for me, it's okay. But you certainly don't want to see one that's way off base, because it's just going to lead to a lot of compensations in the swing, and it's going to make life difficult. It's sometimes the worse your grip is, the better you swing, the worse you hit it. So you don't want to put yourself, this game's hard enough, so you don't want to put yourself in a position where by improving your golf swing, you actually hit the ball worse, right? A lot of golfers that have a poor grip, they make a lot of swing compensations in order to make that grip work. So if they don't change their grip and they get their golf swing better and they're not making those compensations as much, a bad swing, a good swing is going to hit a bad shot with a bad grip. So that's where it becomes important. But to answer your question, you just don't want to be too much on one side.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And how would you, and what would be the process of kind of landing on a specific grip as you start to swing? Would be simply kind of figuring out, landing a theoretical benchmark and then seeing how you swing a couple of times and what's the ball flight outcome of it? Like, what would be that process like for a person as he's, practicing to find that grip he's comfortable even in the beginning? And maybe there are some strategies that you've seen over the years that have been effective. One thing you mentioned, obviously, not to be on either of the extremes. Is there anything else in this kind of, especially in the beginning stages, that are some do's or don'ts for players that are, finding their grip?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, even though it's like we said, an individualistic part of the game, and there's not one grip that fits all. There is, what I would refer to as a good grip, right? So a good grip is one that kind of runs diagonally from the middle of one's index finger through the base of their pinky, right? So in looking at it from this angle, it would kind of run this way diagonally through the fingers, so that you've got a good hold on it, and you've got it in the fingers. That will certainly improve your range of motion with wrist hinge going back, and a little bit with how the wrists work through the ball and releasing the club. So I think it's important. One thing I'll do with students quite often is I'll use a Sharpie, and so I'll draw a line on my glove, so with a Sharpie, so I can see the diagonal line and how I want the grip to fit in there. And yeah, it's a good way of practicing. It will just ensure that the club's in the same position every time, because at the end of the day, that's what's most important. You want to have a little bit of consistency in terms of doing the same thing over and over, and having the line on the glove and a reference point, so to speak, for where the club should be sitting diagonally across the fingers will help.
Yeah. Is there anything with regards to equipment that the person should take into account, measuring or analyzing his grip as he's swinging?
Sure. I would say the thickness of the grip is super important. As club fittings become more and more popular, I certainly see that as being a big part of the whole sort of fitting process, is measuring a golfer's hand size and seeing how big their hands are. If a golfer has large hands and their grips are too small for them, that will increase that will promote a stronger grip. They'll have it a little bit more in the fingers and the hand a little bit turned over. And likewise, contrary to that, if they have small hands and a big grip, a mid-size or an oversized thicker grip, the club's going to sit very much high in the palm, and they're going to have a weak grip, which will be detrimental. So I think, texture is obviously a preference thing in terms of what kind of grip they're playing, but grip size is very important and something that I see on a daily basis on the lesson tee that golfers are struggling with. I'll see golfers with somewhat medium size to small hands showing up with big jumbo thick grips, and the club is just sitting very high in the palm, and the grip is weak, and they're struggling with a big fade or a slice. And I'll see, contrary to that, I'll see golfers with bigger hands that have grips that aren't big enough for them or don't have enough tape underneath, and it's promoting a strong grip and a much more handsy swing. So I would say the grip size, the diameter of the grip, super important in this whole process.
Yeah, and obviously with HackMotion, our key focus area around the swing is obviously around the wrists, which we feel like are very important in the swing. What's your perspective? How do the wrists? What's the wrist relationship to the grip, especially in the swing? Obviously, how are you thinking about this from a coaching perspective, and then how's that dynamic for you when working with students?
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, the grip has probably the biggest influence on wrist action, and wrist action is critical. So the grip is a huge, huge influence on this whole thing and can really change some of the HackMotion numbers, for better or worse, big time, right? So the more the club's in the fingers and the more the club is a little bit in the grip in a little bit of a stronger way, the easier it is to manipulate the face and the shaft and to really sort of twist and turn on things. The higher the club is sitting in the palm, the more restrictive the wrists are, and the less wrist action and the less manipulation that's going on, which is why we putt that way, right? When you're putting, you don't want the wrist to be very involved. It's the opposite of the swing. So we sit the club much higher in the palm when we're putting, to take wrist action out of it. So that's why it's the opposite. But it's a huge part of it, and depending on what someone's looking for, right? Whether from a coaching standpoint, they're trying to add more flexion or more extension, or trying to adjust the radial and ulnar numbers, the grip has a massive influence on that, and it is a really big part of my coaching and how I go about changing those numbers on HackMotion.
Yeah, and when working with the student, let's say that he has essentially kind of a swing fault that's somewhere around the grip and the wrists. What's your process like? When is it the kind of the grip that gets adjusted? Is it you're trying to get something else on the wrist action? What's that process like? And where do you start with a student that has a particular issue where ultimately they're not able to hit a ball straight, and you think the issue is somewhere around the wrist and the grip? How you go about the process of fixing that, and what's the kind of the process there?
It's a great question. I think first and foremost, from a coaching standpoint, it's important to, sort of diagnose what's causing the miss when it's offline, right? So is it more face related? Is it more path related? What's the start line? Where is it curving? How much is it curving? How offline is it? All those things factor in. And then for me personally, when it is more face related is really when I would start to dive in there and get into the wrist angles. When the start line is off, the club face is sort of, there's a lot of variance in the club face throughout the swing and an impact. That's when I would sort of attack the wrist angles a little bit more if it's more face related than path related. And it's interesting, obviously, when a golfer in the past, when a golfer is struggling with a slice, one would always just think, okay, I'm gonna strengthen their grip, but that's not always, sometimes strengthening the grip creates a little bit more extension, a little bit more cup in the wrist that opens the face even a little bit more sometimes. So I'm not always quick to go stronger grip when I see a golfer slicing. Contrary to that, when I see a golfer hooking, a really excessively strong grip is obviously not going to help. So I'm much more inclined to weaken a hooker's grip than I am to strengthen a slicer's grip. That's not to say I wouldn't strengthen a slicer's grip. It's just that every case is different, and that's sort of something that I'd be looking at and analyzing. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. It's probably, for me, I can have the most success in the shortest amount of time as a teacher by adjusting grip and wrist angles if someone's club face is off.
Yeah. And what will be kind of maybe your general suggestions for someone who's going through that process, maybe also partially on his own, maybe he has the access to the technologies and he's able to analyze all his data. Are there any kind of coaching suggestions you would have for a person that's trying to figure out whether it's a grip or it's a wrist problem, and maybe kind of what would be some practical suggestions how to go through that process? Is it just maybe taking 20 swings, look at the numbers, see where you're trending, or there's something else he could do?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's got to be some good self-diagnosis in there in terms of putting the blame in the right area. But let's say a golfer sort of, they're missing the ball to the right, and they go through this whole process, and they've determined that the club face is the culprit and the face is very open. Once that's been determined, then I would always look at the grip first, right? If the grip is in a good position where it's my preference, where I talked about, where it's on the neutral side but favoring slightly stronger, then if it's already in that position and the face is open, then obviously I wouldn't look to fix it. But I always look at that first, because it's the quickest adjustment that you can make. So if the grip is off and someone sees they have an excessively, let's say, weak grip, and they're struggling with slicing the ball to the right and having a hard time controlling the club face, and yeah, I would look to, I'd look at my grip size, I'd look at where the club is sitting in my hands, and there's great golf instruction books too that show great pictures of the grip, and like I said, it stood the test of time. So any golf instruction book that's showing you what a good grip looks like is good reference point. Drawing the line on the grip for where you want the club to be sitting is important. Mirror work is excellent. Most ranges have, there's a mirror somewhere in the vicinity. So looking at your golf swing in a mirror, looking at your grip in a mirror can be very, very helpful. At the end of the day, it's like anything else, though. I think you need to have a little bit of a plan, right? So you need to have a plan for the grip, right? What am I trying to achieve? Is my grip too strong and I'm trying to weaken it a little bit? Is my grip too weak and I'm trying to strengthen it a little bit? And then just be diligent with the practice. And you don't want to hit too many golf shots with the wrong grip, right? So staying on top of that and being a little bit more diligent with practice, and going through the routine is very important. So routine is huge with grip. Everyone talks about pre-shot routine and the steps they take as they approach the ball to hit a shot, but just grip routine, right? So when I'm taking my grip, I like to hold the club down at the bottom of the grip with my right hand. I'm right-handed. Make sure the club face is square and the leading edge is straight, and then I'll kind of fit my left hand on there as I'm holding the club up off the ground. Fit my left hand on there in the fingers, and then I'll just slide my hand down. So I go through this procedure every time during my routine. I hold it in my right hand at the bottom of the shaft, make sure the face is square. I'll fit my club in the fingers there. My left hand, make sure it looks good to my eye as I'm holding it above the ground, and then just slide my hand down. A lot of golfers take their grip with the club on the ground as they're approaching the ball, but I like to take it up here in front of me. It just ensures that it's the same way every time. But I think grip routine is an overlooked area that especially newer golfers would benefit from.
Yeah. And are there any kind of maybe physical limitations that people and golfers should consider, maybe that they are not able to grip the club with a strong grip, that also are something where you shouldn't be kind of pushing against your kind of physical limitations, where you just don't feel comfortable? Is there some other aspects like that a golfer should consider, where it's not, again, where you're not just aiming for a strong grip, right? You're just trying to find your grip. Is there something like that you've seen that people also should consider as they're going through this process?
Absolutely, that would play a role. It's one of the first questions that I'll ask a golfer when they're coming for a first lesson as I'm assessing them is physical limitations or past surgeries, or sometimes you'll get a golfer that's had wrist surgery and they don't have good flexibility in their wrist, or they've broken their wrist a few times in their life previously. So as a coach, you've got to know those things, and you've got to take those into account, and you've just got to make adjustments. I mean, you certainly don't want to ask a golfer to do something that they can't do, or something that's going to cause injury or hurt. But that absolutely will play a role and should go into, some golfers will show up and they have bad arthritis, right? So when you have bad arthritis, oftentimes a thicker grip, or a grip that's a little bit bigger than normal, helps with arthritis. So even though that might not be the best thing for that person's golf swing, a thicker grip, it might be what's necessary from a health standpoint, because they've got bad arthritis. So you've got to navigate through those things as a coach. And it's just important to know a golfer's previous history, and that is a big aspect of it for sure.
Yeah. And when you look at, for example, in particular with HackMotion, when you're using the product with golfers as it measures also the grip value, are there any specific numbers or trends that you like to see when the golfer's going through his routine and making multiple swings at a time? Is there a specific thing he should be focusing on? Is it maybe hitting consistent values for the grip? Is it trying to be consistent? Is it maybe kind of just being in the range that they should think about? How should they think about when using HackMotion in their daily training sessions? How should they kind of maybe look at the numbers, and how should they think about them? And then from that perspective.
Yeah, I think, you're not trying to be so rigid where it's like, okay, I've got to be on this number every
Yeah.
time or it's not going to work. There's just got to be some parameters to it. So personally, I'll look at the address position quite a bit on HackMotion in determining someone's grip and whether it's where I'd like it to be. And I like the numbers to be in a relatively low number. I'll look for anywhere from sort of 10 to 25, so to speak, or 10 to 25 to 20, something in that range. I've seen at least the best players that I'm working with at the tour level. At address, obviously you don't want it to be zero because there does have to be a little bit of extension there of a cup in the wrist and a little bit. But I say like the mid to high teens or low 20s is probably what I see as being the most consistent number for the grip with the address position in terms of the extension, so that you don't have to make many compensations in the swing.
Mm-hmm. And you already mentioned the specific case example about slicing or hooking already before. When a student is struggling with either a slice or a hook, and he feels like it's a grip issue, is it always the case that when he should strengthen the grip with a slice and weaken it with the hook, or it's just a little bit more elaborate than that? And something else also has to change, or like how would you go about that process for the golfer?
Yeah, I would say it's different for everyone. And like I made reference to before, I'd say when you are hooking the ball, you would usually almost always benefit from weakening your grip and placing the club a little bit higher in the palm, almost always in at least the experiences that I've had. So that is something that I would definitely look to. Now, if someone's hooking the ball and they have what I would say is a good grip, neutral to slightly strong, then I obviously would not change that in any way. But if they're hooking the ball and they have a very strong grip, I would look to change that pretty much right away, especially a younger, flexible golfer. If someone's slicing the ball, I wouldn't always necessarily strengthen the grip. A lot of times golfers show up with a strong grip and they're still slicing the ball. So it doesn't always, sometimes having a strong grip, it adds a little bit more extension, and it makes it more difficult to not slice. So at the end of the day, for a slicer, I'm trying to improve their wrist angles.
Mm.
And I am looking as a coach to say, okay, can I improve their wrist angles by adjusting the grip? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is maybe not. So that would be what I would look at. I would say, okay, can this person benefit by changing the grip to achieve a better wrist angle? And if the answer is yes, I would certainly change it. But sometimes strengthening the grip for a slicer is very important, and sometimes being neutral. Sometimes being neutral on it even helps to flex that wrist a little bit more, as opposed to being stronger. So I kind of take that on a case by case basis. But the contrary to that is a hooker will almost always benefit from a weaker grip in the experiences that I've had.
Yeah, it sounds like it's always not as simple of just kind of tweaking just the grip. It's always a little bit of a kind of a more complex solution, right? Given the student, his skill level, experience, and all of those factors combined. So it's not as simple.
Yeah, one thing I'd say, Martins, again, is a good drill for golfers and something to look at is to actually make practice swings or practice your grip with a putting grip, because with a putting grip, the top is flat. Right, so you're able to really change the club and adjust and manipulate your wrist a little bit easier with that top part being flat. The other thing with a putter is it has very little loft on it. Right, a putter has 3-4 degrees of loft on it, so you're able to see the face a little bit more clearly. The average golfer at the top as to whether it's a little open or a little bit closed. So I have a lot of my students practice if they're struggling with the grip and club face. I'll have them practice a lot by making practice backswings with a putter. And a putter grip, it's a little bit easier to see what the face is doing and to control the wrist.
And that would be simply kind of just doing some practice swings in probably maybe a little bit of a slow motion, I would assume, right? Of just kind of looking what's that relationship like? How's the face with respect in conjunction with the grip, I would assume, right?
Absolutely. Slow motion, in a mirror, indoors. You're not actually going to be hitting a ball with a putter. So in this time of year in the off season for most golfers, especially in the Northeast, it's great practice. I've actually had students that put a putter grip on a 8-iron and practiced hitting shots with the putter grip when they're 8-iron. Just really helps with face control. And I have a flat cat putting grip, which is a more extended flat line at the top, and I think practicing with something like that is great to control wrist angles and club face.
Yeah, and when it comes to the swing and specifically chipping and short game in particular, is there anything in particular to that part of golf and grip that people should think about, or is it kind of very consistent as it is for the full swing?
Yeah, I would say it's fairly consistent. I don't see too many golfers that have one kind of grip with full swing and a totally different kind of grip with chipping and pitching around the greens. I would say you've got to be somewhat careful if you've got a strong grip, right? A strong grip is not as ideal when you're hitting shots around the green because it gets the wrist a little bit too active almost if it's too strong and in the fingers. We've heard Tiger even talk a little bit about how he weakened his grip a little bit for certain chips and pitches and had the club sitting a little bit more upright and higher in his palm. So I'll do that with some players, better players. I'll do it with a little bit more, make it maybe a slight grip adjustment for chipping and pitching, get the club sitting a little bit more upright and higher in the palm to take some hands out of it. So yeah, there are some times I would say for better players mainly though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing actually that has come up obviously within our community in questions is something around the grip pressure, right? Because that's always kind of, especially for beginners, and it was for myself, or that question like, well, what should be the pressure, how you grip the club? Are there any kind of suggestions how to think about that for a golfer, like how strong is too strong and how weak is too weak, and what to look at to potentially
Right.
diagnose some sort of issue around that?
Sure, I'm a big believer in a firmer, tighter grip. I feel that when the club is too loose in the hands and people are just trying to be so loose with the grip pressure, the club moves around a lot and things change. So I'm a big believer in a good firm grip. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would have my grip at pretty high, like 8, 9, something like that. I've talked to a lot of tour pros and students about this at a high level, and almost all of them say the opposite of what the average golfer says. When the pressure's on and they've got to hit a great shot, they grip that club a little bit tighter and it takes some of the manipulation and the nerves out of the hand. So I am a big believer in a firmer grip pressure, a tighter hold on the club, and I actually think that it helps to manipulate and make adjustments and change wrist angles a little bit easier when you've got a good strong hold on the club. And that's the opposite to what a lot of golfers are doing, right? There's a bunch of things out there that golfers have been trying to do for years and years that we've learned the opposite holds true. And I would say grip pressure is very high on that list.
Yeah. And is it just the case that with a loose grip pressure, there's just so many things that can happen, where there's just kind of too many freedom, I guess, for the club to rotate? The wrists can do different things. Is it that the case? Is just like the risks go way up
For sure.
if the pressure is too low?
Absolutely. Yeah. The club kind of swings you instead of you swinging the club, right? The head end of the club kind of does its own things and it's just more difficult to control. And controlling the face definitely becomes more difficult with too loose of a grip. And that, to me, goes for all aspects of the game, from driver to putter. I think if you're driving the ball, which is one side of the spectrum, and putting the ball on the other side of the spectrum, I think a loose grip is it can be very detrimental.
Yeah. And is there anything in particular a person should have in mind working with different set of clubs? Like, for example, should he have some difference when working with hitting a driver versus iron shots? Or should the approach always with perspective to the grip should be consistent? Besides, obviously, putting, which is kind of a little bit of an outlier in that sense, but with other clubs, would be the consistency would be the main focus for the players?
Yeah, I would say it should be pretty similar through the bag. Like we said, there may be some short game shots around the green where you'd maybe want to weaken things a little bit, and obviously the putter, like you said, but through the bag from driver, to wedge, I would say the grip should be, pretty much the same. The routine should be the same in terms of getting your hands on the club in the right way, in the same way every time, and also how the club, how your hands are set on the club. Absolutely.
Yeah. And one thing, when we look at also again wrist angles in conjunction with the grip, the kind of the popular words obviously is the flexion extension. Always, that's the kind of the primary thing we focus on when it comes to wrist angles. But in your experience, how does radial and ulnar deviations kind of tie into that? Because that's also obviously a nuance around the wrist angles that's important. How does that kind of fit into the wrist angle grip discussion for you?
Sure, I think that's a big part of it, right? So in the backswing, hinging the club is super important. I think using your wrist, getting the club, getting the angle set, getting a little bit of leverage and angle on the club, and just from a sequencing standpoint and a strike standpoint, really important, especially for newer golfers. And coming down, whether you're trying to hold the angle or we hear a lot of golfers trying to throw it a little bit more these days. Being able to do those things, right? Set the club a little bit more radial, throw the club a little bit more ulnar. You've got to have the club in the right spot in your lead hand. I mean, you've got to have it a little bit more in the fingers so that you can, you got good range of motion in your wrist, and you can work it the way that you want to. It's similar to hammering something, right? If you were hammering something naturally, you wouldn't put a hammer high in your palm and bang down on it. You'd put it a little bit more in the fingers, and you'd use your wrist a little bit more. And I tell students it's pretty much the same with the golf swing. You've got to have an ability to use your wrist the way that you want, setting the club going back, releasing it properly coming down, and having it sitting slightly diagonal across the fingers is really important in order to adjust some of those important numbers, like you're making reference to radial and ulnar.
Yeah. Again, it kind of, I think the thing that kind of struck me throughout all of the conversation is it's really kind of also a process, right? Where again, you're not looking at the grip in isolation to everything else. It is very much tied to the wrists and what the rest of your body is doing throughout the swing. So I think I would assume that's also part of the process, right? Where you just need to be kind of understanding of different parts of your swing as you're training, as you're playing, and just kind of develop that knowledge base, or essentially what you are doing throughout the swing.
100%. It's like, and it doesn't matter what level you're at, right? I have students that have been playing the game for 1 year, and I have students that are playing the game at the tour level. And it's like, you got to have a plan of some, what are you trying to achieve in your swing, right? What is your coach trying to get you to achieve? Is it more club face control? Is it a little bit more wrist hinge to get the club a little bit more up in front of you? And then depending on what that thing is there an area with the grip, that you can adjust or improve to help you achieve what your goal is? And oftentimes the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like it. Well, Jason, I appreciate you joining our conversation. I think there's a lot of stuff to learn and to digest, especially as I'm going to be working on my swing in preparing for the season. But I appreciate you joining for a webinar. We will have the live Q&A after this call, after this presentation. But Jason, again, thank you for joining, and thanks for sharing your insights.
You got it, Martin. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And HackMotion's added a good a good dimension to my teaching, and along with things like TrackMan and launch monitors, being able to show a student how the number is changing and how we're working towards improving. If you can measure it, it's great feedback for the student. And HackMotion's given us an opportunity to measure something that's super important part of the swing, and has really helped my teaching. So thanks.